That's
of monkeys and movie stars, homosexuals, heterosexuals, hemophiliacs, Haitians, scientific rivalry, public hysteria, and death. The setting is just as varied, the jungles of Central Africa, bathhouses and brothels in Sydney and San Francisco, hospital wards and homes. It is, of course, the story of AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, the disease of headlines. The latest, that the AIDS virus has been detected in a man's teardrop, and that in New York it's the biggest killer of men between the ages of 30 and 39. But its origins are far, far from New York. In Africa, a continent from where Graham Davis has just returned with a series of reports we'll be seeing over the next few weeks here on Sunday. He begins this report on AIDS from that continent.
The Congo is one of the great rivers of Africa, wide and fast-flowing as it carries the equatorial rains from the dense jungles in its catchment. Facing one bank is the country which bears its name, Congo. On the other, the place Muhammad Ali helped put on the map, Zaire. No one knows precisely when it happened or how, but this almost certainly is the cradle of the AIDS virus, where it embarked on its deadly path into the world at large. Its source appears to have been that most harmless and human-looking of creatures, the monkey.
We know that there are some, the African green monkey, for instance, have antibodies against a virus which is closely related to the human AIDS virus. So one possibility which could have occurred in the past is one monkey infected by chance, by accidentally a man, and the virus went to the human species this way.
Dr. Luc Montagna is arguably the world's foremost AIDS researcher, the man who first isolated the virus 2 years ago.
How is it that this could have been passed from a monkey to a man?
Well, it's not difficult to imagine that the virus is transmitted by blood, mostly. It's present in lymphocytes, so we can imagine sometimes a monkey bitten a man, and also a man could have eaten some meats which are not cooked properly and contain a live virus from the monkey.
From monkey to man, perhaps 20 years ago, perhaps 40 years ago, nobody can really be certain. But one theory is that the virus was dormant for a long time and only erupted because of social upheaval. A civil war in Zaire drove thousands into the cities and produced the familiar patterns of conflict, overcrowding, disease, and a breakdown of traditional values in which prostitution flourished. It was a combination that produced the spark.
There are many instances where you have viruses and infectious agents existing in wild form in a community and not producing disease until a behavioral change or a behavioral pattern brings it about.
Dr. Gottlieb Monacoso is the World Health Organization's Regional Director for Africa, based in Congo.
Doctor, from the information you have, just how high is the incidence of AIDS in Africa?
I think the honest answer is we don't really know.
Lack of information is endemic in Africa, as is the poor quality of medical care and facilities for diagnosing disease. But AIDS on this continent seems to be almost entirely a heterosexual disease, affecting men and women in equal numbers. In the cities of Zaire, as many as 1 in 10 people are thought to be carrying the virus. It's also considered widespread in Congo, Rwanda, and Burundi, and has also emerged in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Zambia, and Angola. 1 in 10. Could this be the pointer of things to come in the West?
If there is no prevention, if also the heterosexual transmission occur at the same rate as in Africa, we will have the same situation in 10 years' time. But this is only one possible scenario. There are some more optimistic hypotheses, assuming we will do something, we can make a vaccine, can make a good treatment for AIDS first, and we can also have decreased the transmission by heterosexual contacts.
Of course, in Africa, as elsewhere, the one bright spot is that having the AIDS virus doesn't necessarily mean having AIDS.
Only a few, a small fraction of the infected people will have this severe disease. Some of them will have a benign disease, which is called sometimes lymphadenopathy, and most of them will have nothing.
Because one thing that has emerged, hasn't it, is that people who do contract AIDS often have other immune deficiency problems as well. In the case of Africans, what sort of immune deficiency would they have that would contribute to this?
Well, one possibility is they have often malaria infection, chronic malaria infection. They have also tuberculosis, and both are immune-depressing diseases.
Prostitution has emerged as one likely cause of AIDS spreading not only through Africa, but to the rest of the world. One theory is that the disease was carried to the Caribbean and then North America and Europe by some of the several thousand Haitians who lived in Zaire until the mid-70s. As far as many Africans are concerned, though, it's not them, but people like these who are to blame for the present crisis.
The fire is raging in the United States of America. It's the #1 country. That's where the AIDS disease was first recognized. And the rate at which it has been growing there suggests that the problem, and as much as we know about its transmission, is related to human behavior, and behavior of rather extreme and bizarre nature. Many of the homosexuals don't even know their partners. They don't know them. They meet in a number of places that they meet, have a relationship with this one, come back the next day, another one, and another one, which is extraordinary behavior. And really, my feeling is that really the issue to face squarely is for human beings to behave in the way in which God meant them to do.
In African society, homosexuality is no laughing matter. Officials maintain it's virtually unknown. God's way is the straight way, the heterosexual way. All of which accounts for a general feeling that the finger of blame is being pointed unfairly at Africa.
There's a background to all this, and this is the initial reaction, particularly of the US public, to find a scapegoat for AIDS. First, it was the Haitians who had to have it, and then it had to be the Africans.
Do you find that African governments are very sensitive about this issue?
I would say that anyone would be upset if they felt that a finger is being pointed in their direction when there is no real basis for it.
Surely, though, the fact that there's a fire raging in the United States is because they have the facilities to determine the level of the disease. Isn't it possible that an even greater fire is raging in Africa right now?
I don't think so. I think it's most unlikely that we have anything anywhere near what the United States would have at this time.
It would certainly take some feat for Africa to fail to diagnose or conceal figures like these. In the United States, between 1 and 2 million people have the AIDS virus without symptoms. Another 100,000 have symptoms, such as night sweats, swollen lymph glands, and mononucleosis infections. And of 12,000 with full-blown AIDS, half have already died. The Reagan administration has spent $200 million to fight what it calls the #1 menace to public health. Still, there's a feeling among gays that more would have been done had it not been homosexuals who were affected.
It's perceived as being something that happens to gay men. It's a political hot potato. Nobody wants to touch it.
Political hot potatoes create their own priorities. And in America as elsewhere, the first priority was to protect people getting AIDS in blood transfusions. With a screening process now developed, the effort has switched to finding a vaccine for those not yet affected. At the bottom of the list is a cure. Not much comfort for thousands of people like American Paul Hudson, whose own doctor gave him up for dead.
He talked to me briefly. I said, "Would you accept me as your patient?" He threw up his arms to the ceiling, looked up, and said, there is no cure for AIDS, and there never will be. He said, I can't take handling so many young people dying. He said, I just cannot take it.
It's that sort of rejection that has led those Americans like Paul to embark on a desperate pilgrimage across the Atlantic to Europe. Paris this summer is like any other, a magnet for visitors from all over the world. But there's a new kind of visitor this year, the AIDS victim, pursuing one of the few avenues remaining open. Among the desperate who came to Paris this year, among the world's best-known names.
Mr. Rock Hudson has acquired immune deficiency syndrome, which was diagnosed over a year ago in the United States. He came to Paris to consult with a specialist in this disease.
It took a movie star with AIDS to really sheet home the extent of the crisis in America. Until Rock Hudson, Ronald Reagan had steered clear of even mentioning the word AIDS. But even tainted blood runs thicker than water in Hollywood's acting fraternity, and the president called his old buddy in Paris. Hudson had come with dozens of others in search of the only real hope left open to him.
It's exactly 100 years since Louis Pasteur revolutionized medicine by discovering the first vaccine. And now a similar quest goes on here at the institute in Paris that bears his name. It was here in 1983 that a French research team first isolated the AIDS virus. And it's here that an increasingly anxious world awaits news of a cure.
Luc Montagna was the man Rock Hudson came to see, the head of the Pasteur AIDS team. He was the first to isolate the virus that attacks the immune system and renders its victims unable to fight off deadly diseases. And he gave it a name, LAV, lymphadenopathy-associated virus. It was to be 13 months before American researchers breathlessly announced they had discovered the virus. They called it HTLV3, and it was the same. The race for a cure was on, at stake the honor of both teams and both countries.
There's a lot of competition going on between you and the Americans, isn't there?
Yes, there is a scientific competition, as usual in science, and I hope this will increase the speed of the findings.
There has been a certain amount of tension between you and the American team, though, hasn't there?
No, well, we had some problems in the past. There are still some discussion about the name of the virus and how it should be classified. We were convinced ourselves we had the right virus, but our colleagues were not convinced.
Why don't you get together with the Americans and work together to come up with a cure?
Yes, I think it's a good idea. We are proud to have made this first discovery, but we had at some time some difficult time even in France to be convincing enough that we had the right virus.
What the French have that the Americans don't is an experimental AIDS treatment program. Hence the journey to Paris by Rock Hudson and about 40 other Americans like Bob White.
The government could come over and talk to the Pasteur Institute. The researchers in the United States could get on an airplane just like I did and come over here and talk to them. Have they done that? No.
The hope of people like Bob rests with this antiviral drug, HPA-23, which is aimed at stopping the growth of the virus itself.
What we have found is it can decrease the number of infected lymphocytes. This is clear, but clearly also this drug does not cure its patients. They still have immune depression.
So the hope for the moment is to contain the disease, to stop the gradual degeneration that leads to death. But what about a cure? And what about the fears of some of a worldwide AIDS epidemic? A plague claiming the lives of millions.
No, I don't think we will go to plague. We hope to find something something like a vaccine or a cure. I cannot say when, but I think it will not take
very long.
Very long.
Can you put a date on it?
No, I cannot give any date, but I can assure you that many groups in the world are working very hard on this problem now.
Of course, if Luc Montagnier comes up with a cure for AIDS, he'll go down in history at pretty much the same level as Louis Pasteur anyway, won't he?
Well, I don't know. You see, it's a question. Well, first, you are supposing we'll find a cure. It's not, maybe not true. We'll not find a cure. I think now science has changed. You see, at the time of Louis Pasteur, it was really the research was based on individuals, on personalities. But now the research is always in groups, in large groups, with laboratory-like factories.
So the factories of science labor to find an answer to the AIDS crisis. When that answer will be forthcoming, no one can really say. But there's some comfort in the predictions of World Health Organization officials like Gottlieb Monacosa.
With the level of biomedical technology that we have, a problem like this, I don't think biomedically will be with us for a decade before somebody cracks it. I'm sure somebody will in the next 5 years.
"5 years is the most optimistic of predictions. But even that's cold comfort for thousands. The gay plague is now the Great Plague.
Sunday's Graham Davis reporting from France and Africa.